My parents sold my 10-year-old daughter's antique cello. The one my 91-year-old grandmother placed in her hands like a blessing. They used a notarized letter to make it look legal. They took $17,000. Then they spent every cent building a pool at my sister's house. They thought they got away with it. They thought I would cry. They thought I would beg. They thought I would choose peace over proof. But when my grandmother found out, she did not scream. She did not threaten. She did not even raise her voice. She smiled. Then she said the one sentence that made my parents go white 3 days later, when the certified letter arrived. That cello was in my trust. If you think family betrayal hurts more when it comes wrapped in smiles and Sunday dinners, then stay with me. Because this story starts with a little girl and a cello named Harriet. And it ends with a courtroom. An eviction. And a 10-year-old child getting back the one thing they thought she would be too small to fight for. My name is Diana. I am 34. I am a paralegal. I am a single mom. And this is the story of how my family stole from my daughter. Then learned the hard way that paperwork hits harder than shouting. Before we begin, take 1 second to subscribe. Like this video if you believe protecting your child is never wrong. And comment where you are watching from, because by the end of this story, I want to know who stayed to hear every last part of it. Now let me take you back to last September. The week everything cracked open. Our apartment was small. 2 bedrooms. 1 bathroom. A kitchen window that stuck every time it rained. A living room full of furniture with stories attached to it. A lamp from a yard sale. A table from a neighbor who moved out. A couch I told myself still had a few good years left, even though the springs told a different story. But none of that was what made our home feel alive. It was the sound. Every afternoon at 415 Lucy would sit by the window in her room and open the case. Then she would lift Harriet out with both hands like she was holding something sacred. She would settle the cello between her knees. Draw the bow across the strings. And suddenly our little apartment would sound bigger than it was. Richer than it was. Safer than it was. Harriet was a 1923 Heinrich Müller cello. German-made. Deep amber varnish. A faint restored crack across the top plate that had been repaired decades ago so carefully you could feel it only if you knew where to look. My grandmother Eleanor used to say the cello had a scar, not damage. That old instrument survived by learning how to heal. Lucy got Harriet when she was 7 years old. It was at her first recital. Not a big one. Just a children's performance in a church hall with folding chairs and bad coffee in the back. Lucy played a simple piece with both feet planted too far apart, and a look of pure concentration on her face, like the whole world might fall apart if she missed a note. Afterward, my grandmother Eleanor asked Lucy to come sit beside her. Eleanor had played that cello at Carnegie Hall in 1958. She had carried it through 2 marriages. 1 cross-country move. Decades of teaching. Decades of living. She had protected that instrument longer than most people stay married. And that day she handed it to my daughter. She did not do it casually. She placed the case on the table. Opened it herself. Looked at Lucy. Then looked at me. She said, "This cello is worth more than a car." But that is not the important part. The important part is that it remembers every room it has ever sung in. And if Lucy loves it properly, it will remember her too. Lucy named it Harriet by the end of the week. She had read about Harriet Cohen in school, and decided Harriet sounded wise and brave. Every morning after that she would unzip the case and whisper "Good morning, Harriet," like she was greeting a friend. That is what my parents never understood. They saw value. Lucy saw a companion. They saw old wood and a resale number. She saw history, comfort, home. When Eleanor gave Lucy the cello, she did it properly. She signed a notarized gift letter. I scanned it that same week and put a copy in my drive. Eleanor kept the original with her attorney. At the time I thought that was one more example of my grandmother being formal and overly prepared. Later I understood it was something else. It was protection. Sunday dinners at my parents' house had always been theatre. My father Gerald sat at the head of the table like he had been elected to rule the room. My mother Pamela floated around him with serving spoons and sympathetic smiles, making sure everyone noticed how much she did for everyone. My younger sister Kristen always came in late enough to be forgiven, but not late enough to be called rude. She had twin boys who were 7 and treated the entire house like a playground. Nobody corrected them. Nobody dared. Her husband Brett would take the best chair in the room and start talking about car sales like he was delivering an economic briefing. And then there was Lucy. My 10-year-old daughter sat in a folding chair they kept in the garage because apparently there were only 6 real seats at the table, and somehow the child with the cello mattered less than everyone else. I had asked twice for a proper chair. Pamela said, "Diana, do not start." That was always how it went. Do not start. Do not be difficult. Do not make a scene. Do not say out loud what everyone else can plainly see. 3 weeks before everything imploded, we were at dinner, and Kristen started complaining about how bored the boys were. "They are trapped inside all summer," she said. "Every house on our street has a pool. It is embarrassing. The boys need space." Pamela made the face she saves for fake emergencies. Gerald grunted like this was a matter of national importance. Lucy sat quietly at the far end of the table and finally said, "Grandpa, my recital is next month. I am playing the Elgar piece." Gerald did not even look up. He said, "Maybe you should try a sport like your cousins." Lucy folded her napkin into a tiny square. That was what she did when something hurt, and she did not want anyone to notice. I changed the subject. I always changed the subject. What I did not notice then was Kristen texting under the table. I caught only a flash of the screen. Pool contractor. A number. A line of zeros. At the time it meant nothing. Later it meant everything. The second week of September, I had to fly to Seattle for work. My firm had a property dispute case, and the senior partner needed me there for document pulls and coordination. 3 days away. A hotel that smelled like bleach. Long hours. Fast coffee. The usual. Lucy had music camp that same week across town. The school provided practice instruments so Harriet would stay home. The morning I left, I tucked the cello into Lucy's room and locked the door. Not because I was afraid. Just habit. When something matters to you long enough, you start protecting it without announcing that you are doing it. As I was leaving, Pamela called. She said, "Let me hold the spare key while you are gone. Just in case there is an emergency." That should have bothered me. It did not. I gave it to her. She smiled and said, "Do not worry, honey. Everything will be exactly where you left it." That was the last sentence she ever said to me that sounded even remotely honest. I was 2 days into the trip when the first piece of the truth slipped past me. I did not know it at the time. When I got back, my next-door neighbor Mrs. O'Carter mentioned it while we were both getting mail. She said, "Your dad came by Tuesday. Said he was checking the pipes. He had a dolly with him though. Seemed like a lot for pipes." My father was a retired general contractor. He could open any lock in any house built after 1970 like it was a party trick. When I was a kid, I thought that made him capable. As an adult, I learned it made him dangerous. I came home on Thursday. One day before Lucy returned from camp. I dropped my suitcase, grabbed a glass of water, walked to her room, and stopped. The lock had been changed. There was a brand new brushed nickel deadbolt where the old brass lock used to be. I remember standing there with my hand still on the key. I remember that small moment when your brain tries to protect you by offering stupid explanations. Maybe the landlord. Maybe maintenance. Maybe some mistake. But deep down I already knew. I found the spare key on the kitchen counter. That detail still chills me. They did not even bother to hide what they had done. I unlocked the new deadbolt, opened the door, looked toward the corner where the case stood. The case was there. For one heartbeat I thought maybe I was wrong. Then I saw the way it leaned. Too light. Too empty. Wrong in a way I felt before I understood. I crossed the room in 3 steps. Dropped to my knees. Opened the case. Empty. The shape of the cello still pressed into the velvet lining. A ghost where Harriet should have been. The bow was gone. The rosin was gone. The cleaning cloth Lucy used every day was gone. Everything was gone. I did not scream. I did not cry. My heart just seemed to forget how to beat for a second. Then the cold came. I called my mother. "Where is Lucy's cello?" Pamela answered too quickly. Too smoothly. She said, "Oh honey, your father took it for maintenance. It needed restringing or something." "Which shop?" "I do not remember the name." "Ask your father." I called Gerald. Voicemail. Called again. Voicemail. A third time. Voicemail. The next afternoon Lucy came home from camp. She dropped her bag by the door and ran to her room. I followed but not fast enough. She opened the case herself. I will never forget her face. Not because she cried. Because she did not. She just stared at the empty velvet and held her bow hand out slightly like some part of her still expected the music to begin. Then she turned to me and asked, "Where is Harriet?" If she had screamed I could have met her there. If she had sobbed I could have held her. But children asking simple questions about unbearable things will break you in ways adults never can. I knelt in front of her and took both her hands. I said, "I am going to find out. I promise." That night I called Eleanor. No answer. Her caregiver Linda said she had an appointment and would return my call the next day. Near midnight I checked my email and saw a notification from the insurance portal. High-value item removed from premises. A claim number. A timestamp. Somebody had not only taken the cello. They had started creating a paper trail. The next morning I drove to Kristen's house without calling. I did not want her prepared. I did not want rehearsed innocence. As I turned onto her street I saw the backhoe first. Then the trench. Then the workers laying rebar. A pool. A real pool. Half the backyard ripped open and reshaped. Brett was standing at the edge of the excavation, with his arms crossed like he had built it himself. Kristen was taking photos with the construction behind her. She looked thrilled. I got out of the car and asked one question. "Who is paying for this?" She looked startled for half a second. Then the smile came back. "Mom and Dad," she said. "Birthday gift for the boys." "How much?" "I do not know exactly. 100,000 something maybe. 100,000 something." She said it like she was guessing the price of patio chairs. I stared at the trench. At the workers. At the steel. At the dirt piled up in the yard. And I had this awful slow realization that somewhere beneath that future pool was my daughter's music. My grandmother's history. All of it turning into concrete and tiles and summer parties for people who would never once think about what paid for it. I left without saying another word. In the car I called Gerald again. This time he answered. Diana, calm down, he said. The cello was a family asset. I sold it to a dealer in Seattle. Cascade Vintage Instruments. $17,000. Your mother and I decided to use the funds for the family. The boys needed a pool. There are sentences that divide your life into before and after. That was one of them. I said that cello was Lucy's. Grandma Eleanor gave it to her. There is a notarized gift letter. He paused. 1 second. Maybe less. Then he said, your grandmother is 91 years old. She does not remember what she signed. And he hung up. I sat in the car gripping the phone so tightly my hands started cramping. He had done it. He had admitted it. Not with guilt. Not with shame. With boredom. Like he was annoyed I had made him explain. But in doing that he made a mistake. He gave me the dealer's name. That mattered later. 2 days later Gerald called what he referred to as a family meeting. That phrase alone made me want to laugh. He gathered us at my parents' house like he was chairing a board session instead of explaining why he had stolen from a child. Pamela had tissues ready before anyone sat down. Kristen folded her arms and set her jaw the way she does when she wants to look injured before anyone attacks. Brett leaned against the fridge drinking beer like he had front row seats to entertainment. They had even invited Aunt Diane and Uncle Roger. An audience. Of course. I came alone. Sonia watched Lucy for me. Gerald began with the tone of a man explaining obvious facts to an unreasonable person. Diana is blowing this out of proportion. The cello was a family item stored in a family property. We made a practical decision to use it for something that benefits all the grandchildren. Pamela dabbed at her dry eyes. I just want fairness for everyone. Kristen jumped in next. My boys never get anything from this family. Lucy gets lessons. Camp. Everything. Grandma Eleanor always favors her. Nobody mentioned the child whose instrument had been taken. Nobody asked how Lucy was sleeping. Nobody cared. I let the room talk itself empty. Then I said the only sentence that mattered. That cello was a notarized gift to a minor. This is not a family disagreement. It is theft. Gerald's face changed immediately. He said, you want to talk lawyers. Fine. But remember who owns the roof over your head. I stood up. Picked up my jacket. Walked to the door. I said I will remember. And so will you. Then I left. No shouting. No crying. No theatrics. I had something better than outrage. I had direction. Within 48 hours the pressure campaign began. Pamela called relatives and told them her version of events. Diana is threatening to sue her own parents over an old instrument. Diana is ungrateful. Diana is tearing the family apart. My aunt texted me not to embarrass the family. My uncle reminded me my parents sacrificed for me. A cousin I had not spoken to in years messaged me to say shame on you. 11 phone calls. 14 texts. Not one person asked how Lucy felt. Not one person asked whether the story was true. Not one person asked what had really been taken. Sonia came over that night. She sat at my kitchen table and scrolled through my messages. Then she looked up and said, this is not family. This is organized loyalty. I laughed even though nothing was funny. In the next room Lucy was practicing on a loaner cello from school. Thin sound. Flat response. Nothing like Harriet. But she played it anyway. Scales first. Then arpeggios. Then the opening passage of Elgar in a voice too small for the piece. She did not complain. That was the part that undid me. She just adapted. She just kept going. That was the exact moment something in me shifted. Not dramatically. Quietly. Like a lock turning. I opened my laptop. Found the PDF of Eleanor's gift letter. Read every word carefully. Irrevocably gifted. Sole and personal property. Lucy and Caldwell. Notarized. Signed. Stamped. Then I picked up my phone and called Eleanor. I also asked her about the house. To explain why that question mattered, I need to tell you something about how I grew up. When I was 17, I got into Portland State with a partial scholarship. I was the first person in my family headed toward a 4-year university. I was proud. My father sat me down at the dining table and told me the college fund was for Kristen. She was going to need it more. I could figure it out. So I figured it out. 2 jobs. 4 years. Debt. Exhaustion. Kristen used part of that same fund for 1 semester of community college. Then dropped out. Then used the rest for her wedding. Nobody called that unfair. When my marriage ended and Lucy was 2 years old, I called my mother because I needed help. Her first response was not, "Are you okay?" It was, "You could not keep a husband and now you want to come home." 2 weeks later she called back and offered me an apartment. Family property, she said. The place Lucy and I had lived for 4 years. What she did not call it was leverage. I helped with Sunday dinners. Drove Kristen when she needed things. Did Gerald's books during tax season. Smiled through every small humiliation, because I was afraid if I stopped cooperating Lucy would lose the only extended family she had. Fear keeps you obedient longer than love ever could. So when Gerald threatened the roof over my head at that family meeting, I heard more than one threat. I heard the whole structure of my life. That was why I asked Eleanor about the house. She called me back the next evening on FaceTime. She was seated in her green velvet armchair. Cream cardigan. Perfect posture. Behind her was the piano and the framed Carnegie Hall photograph. She said, "Tell me everything." So I did. The empty case. Gerald's admission. The dealer. The pool. The meeting. The relatives. All of it. Eleanor listened without interrupting once. When I finished, there was a 5-second silence. Then she said, "Diana, the house your father lives in was never transferred to Gerald. It belongs to the Whitfield Family Trust. He has permission to live there. That is all." I thought I had misheard her. She continued. "The cello is also tied to the trust. It was listed on the insurance schedule. I gifted it to Lucy. But the sale required my authority as trustee. Gerald had none." I just stared at the screen. My father had been living in that house for 25 years, telling everyone it was his. He had never once checked the deed. Eleanor adjusted her glasses and said something I will never forget. "We do not need to shout. We need the right signatures." Then she told me she was calling Marcus Webb in the morning. Her trust attorney. That night I did not sleep. I sat at the kitchen table with coffee and a legal pad, and did what I have spent my career doing for other people. I built a file. First the gift letter. Second Gerald's admission by text and call notes. Third the dealer. Cascade Vintage Instruments was easy to find online. And there on their current inventory page was Harriet. Listed beautifully. Professionally lit. Described as a 1923 Heinrich Müller cello with restoration. asking price far above what Gerald had sold it for. He had not even tried to protect its value. He had just wanted cash fast. I screenshot the listing with the timestamp. Then I went looking for money. Years earlier my parents had set up a shared family Gmail for bills and random subscriptions. Gerald had never changed the password. In the sent folder I found a wire transfer confirmation. $17,000 received from Cascade Vintage Instruments. Deposited into Gerald's personal checking account. Not a trust account. Not a family account. His account. I saved that too. By 2 in the morning I had a folder called Receipts. 14 files. Every one of them a nail. Then I found the thing that changed the shape of the whole story. Buried in the inbox was an email thread between Pamela and Kristen dated September 3rd. 2 days before I left for Seattle. Kristen wrote, "The cello guy said he can do $17,000. That covers the pool and patio. Tell Dad to do it before Diana gets back." Pamela replied, "I will handle Diana. She will get over it." I read those lines 4 times. Then once more slowly. It meant my father was not the mastermind. He was the muscle. Kristen had targeted the cello. Pamela had planned the cover. Gerald had carried it out. I saved the thread. 15 files now. And for the first time I saw the whole shape of it. This had not been a bad decision in a moment of panic. It had been planned. I called Sonia at 6 in the morning. I said, "I have everything." She was silent for one breath, and then asked, "What now?" I said, "Now my grandmother makes a phone call." Marcus Webb's office was on the 4th floor of an old building downtown. Quiet lobby. Brass directory. The kind of place where people bring problems they are tired of carrying. Eleanor arrived in a black town car wearing pearls and a grey coat, and carrying a file thick enough to hurt somebody with. Marcus Webb looked exactly like a trust attorney should. Silver hair. Thin glasses. Calm voice. No wasted movement. He reviewed every document. The gift letter. The trust schedule. The deed. The screenshots. The email chain. The bank transfer. Then he leaned back and laid it out in 3 steps. First, the cello was an irrevocable gift to Lucy, and still a trust-scheduled asset. Selling it without trustee authorization was conversion and potentially theft. Second, Gerald and Pamela would receive a certified demand letter requiring the full $17,000 be restored within 14 days. Third, Eleanor, as trustee, would revoke permissive occupancy of the house. In plain language, my parents would have 30 days to get out of a home they had pretended to own for a quarter century. Eleanor signed every document without hesitation. At 91 years old her hand trembled only until the pen touched paper. Then it steadied. On the way out Marcus said something that stayed with me. They have a pool they cannot afford and a house they do not own. I filed the police report that same day. The sheriff's office smelled like floor wax and stale coffee. I sat under fluorescent lights with my folder on my lap and felt like I was about to step across a line I could never uncross. Deputy Herrera listened while I walked him through it. He asked exactly the questions I expected. Who had access? What documentation proves ownership? What is the estimated value? What evidence supports the sale? I handed him everything. He looked at the wire confirmation for a long moment. Then the gift letter. Then the trust schedule. He said because of the value involved this qualifies as first-degree theft. We will note that the property belonged to a minor. A minor. Hearing Lucy reduced to a category in a report should not have hurt. But it did. Because suddenly it was so plain. My parents had stolen from a child. Not abstractly. Not emotionally. Legally. Factually. A child. I walked out to the parking lot and sat behind the wheel with the engine off. It was raining lightly. That Portland drizzle that looks harmless until you realize your coat is soaked through. Sonia called and asked how I felt. I said Lucy asks about Harriet every day. She does not cry. She just asks like maybe one of these mornings the answer will finally change. Then I started the car. I thought that was the hardest part. It was not. The hardest part was what came next. Because once people like my parents realize the ground under them is shifting, they do not surrender. They perform. That night Gerald came to my apartment. Hard knocks against the front door. Loud enough to rattle the screen. I opened it with the chain still on. Lucy was in her room with headphones on practicing fingerings on the loner cello. Gerald stood there on the porch looking furious and frightened at the same time. His face was the color of someone whose body cannot decide whether to attack or collapse. You called the police, he said. I filed a report. On your own parents. There was a beat. Then he lowered his voice. That dangerous controlled tone he used before yelling when I was a kid. You live in this house because I allow it. By tomorrow morning I can change every lock in this building. You and Lucy can sleep somewhere else. 4 years that threat would have worked. But now I knew something he did not yet know. I looked him straight in the face and said, this house is not yours, Dad. His eyes changed. Not anger first. Confusion. Then panic trying to hide inside anger. Excuse me. You heard me. 25 years and you never checked the deed. He opened his mouth. Closed it. His jaw moved without sound. Then he said, you are done, Diana. You hear me? Done? I shut the door. Locked it. And from Lucy's room I could hear scales on a thin little cello. Still practicing. Still moving forward. The next morning Pamela went online. At 7:14 a.m. she posted on Facebook. Heartbroken today. My oldest daughter is trying to sue her own parents over a piece of furniture. We gave everything to raise our girls and this is how we are repaid. Please keep our family in your prayers. She attached a photo of me at 6 years old in a yellow dress holding an Easter basket. It was brilliant in the ugliest possible way. Little obedient Diana. Harmless Diana. Sweet Diana. The version of me they liked best because she never fought back. The comments poured in. Praying for you. Children today have no respect. So sorry you are going through this. I screenshot everything. Every comment. Every reaction. Every timestamp. Added it to receipts. 16 files. A piece of furniture. That is what Pamela called a cello that had played Carnegie Hall. That is what she called my daughter's heart. Marcus sent the letters the next day by certified mail. 1 demand for full restitution. 1 notice to vacate. A 3rd notice to Kristen informing her that anyone who received benefit from the stolen funds could be pulled into civil action. That night I refreshed the tracking page like it was a heartbeat monitor. In transit. In transit. In transit. The next day the status changed. Delivered. Signed by G. Caldwell. Sonia happened to drive past their house later that afternoon. She called me immediately. She said Gerald was standing by the mailbox reading the letter. Pamela came out to him. He handed it over. She read it and started shaking so badly the pages fluttered in the yard. 20 minutes later my phone rang. Dad, the screen said. When I answered his voice was different. Smaller. Not soft. Just smaller. Diana, what did your grandmother do? This letter says we have to leave the house. This is our house. I said no, Dad. It never was. He tried to blame Eleanor's age. Her confusion. Her memory. I told him she signed every document herself. He said he would fight it. I gave him Marcus's number. Then I hung up and sat very still in the silence that followed. There is something almost eerie about hearing a bully realize the room is no longer his. But that was only the first crack. What happened next was worse for them. Because Gerald did hire a lawyer. And that lawyer did what lawyers do. He checked. He pulled the deed. He reviewed the trust. He saw exactly what Marcus already knew. The house was not Gerald's. Never had been. No transfer. No sale. No deed. No standing. 25 years of certainty ended in one records search. Gerald tried every argument he could think of. Possession. Delay. Family understanding. None of it worked. Because entitlement does not survive documentation. The lawyer told him to negotiate. Gerald refused. That cost him $3,000 in retainer fees. Meanwhile, the pool contractor wanted the next payment. $38,000 due on completion. The money was running out. The pool was only 60% done. And not 1 cent had been paid back. Then Pamela tried a softer route. She went to Eleanor's house with sunflowers and a tin of butter cookies. Her version of peace offering. Linda answered the door and later told me every detail. Pamela sat on the edge of the sofa clutching those flowers like a prop and asked Eleanor to call everything off. For the family, she said. Everything can go back to normal. Eleanor let her speak. Let her finish. Let the silence settle. Then she poured tea. Set the cup down. Looked directly at Pamela. And said, I let my grandson live in my house for 25 years without charging rent. I gave my great-granddaughter a cello I have loved since I was 19. You and Gerald sold it to build a swimming pool. Tell me, Pamela, which part should I forgive first? Pamela apparently started crying before Eleanor had even finished. Eleanor was unmoved. Then she added the line I wish I could have heard in person. The door is behind you. Marcus will be in touch. Pamela left with the flowers. Linda said Eleanor watched her go, then took a sip of tea, and said she brought store-bought cookies. That was it. No drama. Just dismissal. Day 14 came and went. No payment. Day 15 Marcus received a one-line email from Gerald. The money has been spent. I do not have it. No apology. No plan. No shame. Marcus filed the civil suit that afternoon. The court accelerated the matter because a minor's property was involved and the evidence was unusually clean. Then came service. A process server arrived at my parents' house late enough for neighbors to be outside, but early enough for the scene to spread before dinner. He knocked. Gerald opened. He asked if he was Gerald Caldwell. Then handed him the papers. Behind the screen door Pamela's face appeared. White. Frozen. Mrs. Okata next door saw it all while watering her roses. The neighborhood started talking. And once that happens, the family image begins to die faster than people expect. The next collapse came from an unexpected direction. The pool company. Contractors hear things. They knew Gerald was being sued over the very money funding the build. So they called Kristen and demanded a written guarantee for the remaining $38,000. Kristen and Brett did not have it. Not close. They tried credit. Denied. They tried a loan. Denied. The contractor filed a mechanics lien against their house. Kristen called me sobbing. Not sad for Lucy. Not ashamed. Panicked for herself. She said, "Are you happy now? My house has a lien. Brett is talking about leaving. The family is destroyed because of you." I let her finish. Then I said, "You emailed Mom on September 3rd and told her to sell Luce's cello before I got home. You chose the target. You set the timeline. Everything happening now started there." Silence. Then the call ended. A week later Brett filed for legal separation. And still we had not even reached the courtroom. If you are still here, subscribe right now, because this is where everything they built started falling in public. Like this video if you have ever watched the truth catch up slowly and then all at once. And comment family or justice if you already know which side you are on. Because the next part was the part my father never saw coming. The courtroom smelled like old wood and stale air. That strange mixture of boredom and consequence that only courthouses seem to hold. I sat beside Marcus. Eleanor was on my other side in her grey wool coat, with her hands folded over it like she had all the time in the world. Sonia sat 2 rows back, because she refused to let me walk in there alone. Gerald and Pamela came in from the other side with their attorney and the kind of tight faces people wear when they are trying not to look scared. Kristen was not there. Maybe she could not bear it. Maybe she did not want her name floating in the room. Gerald's attorney tried what little he could. Family property. Misunderstanding. Shared access. Informal expectations. Marcus responded with paper. Gift letter. Trust schedule. Wire transfer. Email thread. Insurance record. Police report. Facebook post. He laid the documents out one by one. Calmly. Almost gently. The judge barely needed to ask much by the end. She looked at Gerald and asked the simplest question in the room. Did you have authorization from the trustee to sell this instrument? Gerald said it was in my house. She said that is not what I asked. Silence. He had no answer. The ruling took only minutes. It felt like an hour. The court found in favor of the trust. Full restitution ordered. Structured repayment if not immediate. Wage garnishment authorized if needed. Vacate notice upheld. 30 days to leave. And then the line that cracked something open in me. The dealer was directed to cooperate in the return of the cello pending financial arrangement through the trust. Return of the cello. I had been so focused on proving what they did that I had almost forgotten there was a chance Harriet could come home. Gerald stood up and said, "This is my house." The judge looked at him and said, "The deed says otherwise. Sit down." So he sat. Pamela cried into a tissue. And Eleanor reached over and squeezed my hand once. That one small gesture held more protection than anything my parents had ever offered me in my life. 30 days later a U-Haul backed into the driveway of the house Gerald had called his for 25 years. I did not go watch. This was not a victory lap. It was a correction. Sonia drove by and told me what she saw. Gerald loading boxes without yelling. Pamela carrying lamps and framed photos and not looking up once. No speeches. No appeals. No dramatic final stand. Just 2 people moving out of a lie. They ended up in a 2-bedroom apartment in Gresham. More rent in 1 month than Gerald had paid in years. Eleanor asked Marcus to send a factual 1-page summary of the case to the relatives, who had called me selfish and cruel. No opinions. No insults. Just the deed. The unauthorized sale. The ruling. The restitution. The eviction. After that the messages stopped. All of them. Funny how quickly people lose confidence once they meet the paperwork. The first restitution payment hit the trust account 3 weeks later. Automatic. Court ordered. Math instead of morality. Then one Wednesday in late October Marcus called. He said it is done. You can come pick her up. I drove downtown alone. Harriet was waiting in the conference room in her case. The exact case that had once sat empty in Luce's room like a wound. I set my hands on the latches, and for one terrifying second I was afraid to open it. Afraid something would still be wrong. Afraid the universe had one more trick left. Then I opened it. There she was. Amber varnish. Restored scar. Soft old wood smell mixed with rosin and dust and memory. I touched the strings and they answered with that low deep hum instruments make when they have been silent too long. I buckled the case into the passenger seat for the drive home. I do not care how ridiculous that sounds. Some things deserve seatbelts. At home I carried Harriet into Luce's room and placed the case in the same corner where it had always stood. Then I waited. Lucy got home from school at 3:40. She dropped her backpack by the door. Walked to her room. Stopped in the doorway. She did not scream. She did not run. She walked slowly. Knelt. Opened the case. Looked at Harriet for a long second, as if she needed to be certain this was not some cruel dream. Then she reached out and touched the neck right, where the varnish thickens near the top. And she whispered, "Hi, Harriet." That was it. That was the moment. Not the ruling. Not the certified letter. Not the eviction. A 10-year-old girl greeting her cello like a friend who finally came home. I stood in the hallway holding the door frame, and cried so quietly I barely heard myself. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just that shaking kind of relief that comes when your body realizes it can finally stop bracing for impact. Lucy did not ask where Harriet had been. She just started tuning. Later that night, after she had gone to sleep, I sent one final email to Gerald, Pamela, and Kristen. Short. Clear. No extra words. All future communication regarding restitution goes through Marcus Webb. Do not contact me or Lucy directly. I am establishing no contact boundaries to protect my daughter and myself. Gerald replied within the hour. You will regret this. Pamela sent 6 emails over the next 3 days full of scripture, and self-pity and memory manipulation. I did not read them. Kristen sent one text. I am sorry. I stared at it for a long time. Then I put the phone down. Not because forgiveness is impossible. Because false forgiveness is another form of surrender, and I was done surrendering. The next Saturday, I bought a new deadbolt and installed it myself. I was not as fast as Gerald would have been. But it locked. And that was enough. 2 keys. One for me. One for Lucy. Nobody else. That night I stood at the front door and tested it 3 times. Each click felt like a sentence being completed. A boundary is not cruelty. A locked door is not violence. Protection is not betrayal. 3 months after the ruling Saturday, afternoons became something else entirely. Lucy and I started going to Eleanor's house every weekend. The music room sat at the back of the old craftsman bungalow where the light came in warm and clean through tall windows. The upright piano stood against one wall. Framed concert programs covered another. The metronome still ticked like a second heartbeat. Lucy would set up Harriet. Eleanor would sit at the piano. And then the room would fill with music. Not perfect music. Better than that. Living music. Lessons and laughter and corrections and memory passing quietly from one generation to the next. One Saturday, Eleanor placed her thin hand over Luce's wrist and said, "The arm decides. The finger follows." Lucy nodded seriously, as if she were being entrusted with state secrets. Maybe she was. Another afternoon Eleanor told her keep the cello if life allows. But more important, keep the music. Nobody can take that unless you hand it over. I sat in the corner with tea and listened. And for the first time in years I did not feel like I was performing family. I was simply inside it. In November I started therapy. During my second session Dr. Langford said a sentence I think about often. A boundary is the first honest thing people from dishonest families ever learn to do. I sat with that one for a long time. Because she was right. I had spent most of my life confusing compliance with love. By winter this is where everyone stood. Gerald had made several payments through the court. Slow. Humiliating. Unavoidable. Pamela volunteered at a thrift shop and kept mostly to herself according to Sonia. Kristen's house sold. The lien and legal fees stripped away most of the equity. The unfinished pool remained in the listing photos under a blue top like a half-buried mistake. Brett moved out. The twins split weekends. And Eleanor offered me and Lucy the Birchwood house for $1 a month. Still in the trust, she said. But it should belong to people who know how to fill it with music. I cried when she said that too. It turns out grief and relief live very close together. Lucy got into the Portland Youth Symphony that fall. Youngest cellist in the ensemble. Her audition piece was the Elgar Cello Concerto. The same piece Eleanor had played at Carnegie Hall in 1958. Same instrument. Different girl. Same bloodline of stubbornness. Then came December. The winter recital. Arlene Schnitzer Concert Hall. Row 5 center. Eleanor to my left in pearls and grey wool. Sonia to my right already teary before the lights even dimmed. The hall went dark. Stage lights rose warm and gold. Lucy walked out holding Harriet by the neck with both care and confidence. Not fragile. Not scared. She Saturday. Adjusted the end pin. Set the bow. Waited for the conductor. And then she played. The first movement of Elgar. Deep. Aching. Full. That sound reached places in me words had not touched all year. I thought about the empty case. The changed lock. The trench in Kristen's yard. The certified mail. The judge. The deadbolt. The Saturdays in Eleanor's music room. All of it. And then I looked at my daughter under those lights and understood something with painful clarity. They did not just steal a cello when they took Harriet. They tried to steal continuity. They tried to interrupt the line between a great-grandmother and a child. They tried to turn inheritance into cash. And they failed. Because there she was. 10 years old. Safe. Playing the same piece on the same instrument 66 years later. The audience erupted when she finished. But the part one remember most is not the applause. It is the beat just before it. The last note hanging in the hall. Lucy lowering her bow. Then smiling. Not a performer's smile. A child's smile. The kind a child wears only when she knows in her body that she is safe. Eleanor reached over and held my hand. I did not look at her because I knew if I did I would come apart completely. After the recital Lucy ran into the lobby still carrying Harriet, and Eleanor put both hands on her face and said, "There you are. There you are. Not good job. Not well done. There you are." As if the whole year had been a long effort to bring Lucy back to herself. On the drive home Harriet was in the back seat, and Lucy fell asleep before we got to the bridge. Her concert shoes still on. Program folded in her lap. Face turned toward the window. I remember looking at her at a red light, and thinking this is what all of it was for. Not revenge. Not punishment. Not even justice exactly. Safety. That simple. That holy. People talk about family like blood is the thing that makes it real. It is not. Protection makes it real. Truth makes it real. The people who stand between your child and harm, without asking whether it will be awkward at Thanksgiving. Those are your people. The rest are just relatives. So if you are listening to this while doubting yourself, because someone called you cruel for setting a boundary, hear me clearly. You are not cruel for locking a door. You are not dramatic for naming theft. You are not selfish for protecting a child. And if the people who hurt you call your survival disrespect, then let them. Because peace built on your silence was never peace. It was obedience. And obedience is not love. If this story stayed with you, then do 3 things before you go. Subscribe right now, because this channel is for people who are done being told to keep family secrets that only protect the guilty. Like this video so more people who need this story can find it. And in the comments tell me this one thing. What would you have done the moment you opened that empty case? I read the comments. I care what you think. And I want to hear from the people who know exactly what it means when the quietest person in the room finally stops backing down. Thank you for staying until the end. Protect your peace. Protect your children. Protect the truth even when it shakes the whole room. And remember this. Sometimes the strongest thing you will ever do is not scream. Sometimes the strongest thing you will ever do is keep every receipt. Lock the door. Hold the line. And make sure the music comes home.